Mercury Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Mercury Morning News. It's the podcast where a rotating group of writers, such as myself and my co-host here, interview some other writers on the interesting news stories from the latest news cycle. My name is Ben Nguyen, and today my co-host is...
Nandika Mansinka.
All right, and today Nandika and I are going to cover stories about going from a club to a sorority, UTD's response to the recent ICE ruling and then revocation of said ruling, and how some professors are adjusting to class modality shifts in the wake of the pandemic. And as well, our Radio UTD, I believe programming director Daniel Valdez is also going to be interviewing Savannah later today about an initiative to save our music venues. Because come on, guys, even though the pandemic's rough, you got to be able to listen to concerts at the very end of it all. And as a reminder, you can check out both the Mercury and Radio UTD online at utdmercury.com and radioutd.com respectively. Follow us on social media, either at UTD Mercury or at Radio UTD across the social media space. So starting off today, we're talking to Mr. Ellis Blake Hidalgo, talking about how you become a sorority chapter. The interesting story of Venus, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, so why can't they just start a sorority chapter? Why were they a club for 2 years? What was the point?
So becoming a club at first was really just a way to ensure that to meet the requirements that AKD-FI as the overall organization had set for them. They wouldn't just be allowed to come in straight out of the gate and found a sorority if they didn't have enough members, hadn't raised enough money, hadn't really proven themselves as being able to form a chapter that would last going forward.
And how did they go about getting funding for their sorority?
So they'd hold fundraisers pretty often, and that took a couple of different forms, but usually it came down to stuff like bake sales, drink sales, fundraising money for different charities. Really it was about baking stuff, building stuff, selling it together.
Mm-hmm. And so why were they, like in the story, you're talking about how they're kind of hiding that they're trying to become a sorority in a bit. Why would they just hide, or why would they try to hide the fact that they're trying to become a sorority chapter? Like, why not just come out and be straight with it, be like, hey, it's a club, but we're trying to become a sorority, join up.
So it wasn't so much that they were trying to hide it, but it certainly wasn't the focus of their promotions. When I talked to them about recruiting and what they would say to people that were prospective about joining Venus, the overall message wasn't join us and you get to be in a sorority. It was about the same reason that they started it, which was join us and we'll join us for the sisterhood, for the friendships. And so it was part of the message that wasn't really the focus. They weren't really hiding it so much as they weren't promoting it.
Mm-hmm. Was it always intended for the club to turn into a sorority?
Yeah, that was why it was founded. The founder, Jamie Sun, had an interest in joining a sorority, but when she couldn't really find a space at UTD that she felt right with, she decided to join to try to found a chapter for AKD-FI, which her family had connections to already.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess how many resources go into starting a sorority chapter? You already said that you can't just start a sorority chapter out of the blue. So what do you need? What's like the requirements? Can you give us a rough estimate, kind
of? I really can't. They were very straightforward. This isn't something that they're allowed to discuss. And what they actually did tell me was, as far as keeping it a secret, and also as far as I can tell, this is something that is along the board. This is something that most sororities and other Greek life organizations would try to keep private. But the purpose, at least for AKD-FI, was more about maintaining a mystery, and maintaining a mystery, making sure that information isn't public. And anyone who would know is somebody that's already trying to found a chapter, if that makes sense.
So are there any actual regulations in place that they can't share any of this information, or is it more just for the mystery? Like,
I think it's for the mystery, just about kind of an air of exclusivity is the way they described it.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, I guess for fun we can try to brainstorm about it a little bit. So how long has Venus been in existence?
Well, so Venus actually doesn't exist anymore.
Well, how long did it
exist?
before becoming a sorority chapter?
So Venus existed for about 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they existed for 2 years, and I mean that whole time it was all about, get members, raise money, volunteer, really just do all this stuff that they would do as AKD Phi anyway, just kind of as the, getting ready to become a sorority.
And I guess I know, what is it? You on several occasions have stated that you've been almost attacked into joining their bake sale. Is that right?
That was more of a I knew 2 of their members kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
did they have like a philanthropy or a mission, or what's the purpose of their sorority?
Yeah, so their goal or their mission for philanthropy was primarily breast cancer awareness. And so they told me they would work with different charities and organizations to raise money, volunteer. Another one of their causes was mental illness. So they worked with different centers to raise funds and just spent their time doing what they could for them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now I actually am kind of curious. We can sit here for a little bit. We can brainstorm how much money they kind of raised. So they exist for 2 years, right? Would either of you have an idea of like how long or how often they would run bake sales?
I'd scrolled through their Facebook page and they had been listed. It seemed pretty frequent. Although honestly, if I had to, my theory, and this is just me,
Right.
is it wasn't so much about having like money in the bank, I would say, but just more like proving that you could maybe like meeting like this like that you could continue to raise money, like not to a certain amount, but like continue to bring revenue to AKD Phi.
All right. That makes sense. But hey, I mean, with the amount of bake sales they have, they probably have a lot of money in the bank in either case.
Yeah, I guess it was a good place to start.
Okay. Do you know if there was any kind of trouble, I guess, transitioning members from Venus into a sorority, or were like the members of the club kind of like, all right, we're in the club and now we're in the sorority, baby. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of the impression I got. I mean, it was just kind of a it's the same members. They didn't really add anyone new when they transitioned into AKD Phi. So really, all it was 1 minute they're Venus, then they host a ceremony, and then it's the same people doing relatively the same thing but with a new name. More connections. It's becoming a sorority was a way to expand and be able to branch out.
All right.
So when did they transition to becoming a sorority? Like, did they have a rush or some sort of initiation like earlier this year? What was the timeline?
It was late March that they held the ceremony. That's when the Venus ceased to exist.
So when Venus ceased to exist. So was it, I'm actually curious, was it during like spring break? Or were they able to like do the transition before, COVID went down and everything?
So I know that officially AKD Phi was, or the UTD chapter was established in late March, or at least that's when it was announced. But as far as when the actual ceremony was, because I know they met in person, I'm not entirely sure if that was after or before the COVID announcement or lockdown went in place.
I see. Well, hey, thanks for sitting down and talking with us, Ellis. You've been really insightful about the kind of mysteries of trying to open up a new sorority, or I guess the mystery that they still keep up to this day. But Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Just a reminder, you're listening to the Mercury Morning News on Radio UTD. You can find us at radioutd.com and follow the radio guys at Radio UTD across the social media board. And you can find us at the Mercury at utdmercury.com, as well as just at UTD Mercury at any social platform of your desire, unless it's MySpace, because we're not on MySpace. I don't think anybody's on there. But if you are, tough luck. Move on to Facebook. Radio UTD is having a Retro Rhythm Games Night on Twitch this Thursday, July 30th at 7 p.m. It's going to be a banger. It's going to be a bop. We're gonna see some Parappa the Rapper. I don't know. We might see some Guitar Hero. I'm not privy to the specifics, but it should be a good time. And if you want to work at Radio UTD, the applications are due Friday, August 28th. And applications for the Mercury to become a writer or photographer are open too. I don't know the deadline for that one, but you should check out our website and find out. Next up, for actual stories-wise, we've got Aleena here to talk about UTD's response to the recent ICE fiasco, where they said that international students can't really take online classes, and then they went like, oh yes, actually they can, after Harvard and everybody else made a fit about it. So, Aleena, how did you find sources for this story?
Hey, Ben. For this story, most of the students that I talked to were international students, and I actually found them through talking to some of the other writers on the Mercury and just getting some references. And I also talked to Dr. Thomas Gray, who is a political science professor here at UTD, just for some greater legal context. And most of this just happened. I just reached out via email or text message, and that's just kind of how I got in contact with my sources.
Hey, you just gotta have somebody who knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy, right?
Exactly.
Could you summarize kind of what your story was about, and sort of over the course of your story taking place, the changes that happened?
Yeah, so this was actually pretty chaotic because the rule came out July 6th, and by July 14th, I believe, almost a week later, the rule had been rescinded. And also I'd like to say, I'm saying rule, but it was actually a directive. This was actually not a rule or law that was in place. It was more of a preview of a change they were considering doing. And because of the response from all these colleges with their lawsuits, they just rescinded it, and so it's no longer in place. And what's happened is it's reverted to what it was like in the spring, where students who are from other countries who are here are actually able to study even though they're taking online classes. And originally this rule was basically students who are international students can only take 3 credit hours of an online course while they're staying here. But obviously because of the coronavirus, most classes became online. So it was no longer possible for students to abide by this rule, which is why they made this change. So what happened was with this directive, on July 6th, they previewed changing it so students who were going to be studying in the fall, they would actually, if they were taking all online classes, they'd have to go back to their home countries and they would not be able to study here. Mm-hmm. And just sort of to summarize this really quickly is that a lot happened in the span of the story. And something for me was that I actually spoke to a lot of different people while the story was evolving. And I would like to mention something that, well, this was still, being considered something that was going to happen. I talked to Dr. Juan Gonzalez, who is Dean of, I believe, international graduate students, mm-hmm. something like that. And he told me that in no uncertain terms that UTD was going to fight this, and if international students wanted to stay, they would absolutely make sure they did everything in their power to make sure that they would stay.
Right.
And when this rule very quickly in 1 week, it was, rescinded, and there still has been an impact, and a lot of that is anxiety and concerns from the international student community.
Right. And so can you kind of walk through what's the kind of, I guess, rulemaking process of ICE in general along this line? So you said at this stage it was like a proposal. Is there what goes into it before that and kind of after that in kind of making a rule? Just got me curious.
So there's actually an act called the it's called the Administrative Procedure Act, and it governs the process by which all federal agencies develop and issue regulations. So it's the rules behind the rules. And it includes requirements for publishing notices. So you're announcing this change, and then you have to open yourself up for comment from the public. So they basically have to publish this proposed change in the Federal Register, which is kind of like a newspaper. And anyone from the public, you, me, anyone, can just go to their website and leave feedback. And it can be negative, positive, anything. But the agencies who want to do this, they have to go through each and every single comment and get back to them. And that's to show that they took in consideration of all the sort of thought processes into the law. And so one of the main things that Dr. Gray told me was with the APA, you have to give justification that, for this rule that international students going home, it's at least plausible and it's not arbitrary or capricious. So that means it has to be based off of something reasonable and it makes sense. And again, because this was just proposed, we don't know the actual final justifications they would have used. So that's kind of interesting because we don't know what their rationale would have been because it was struck down so quickly. But the APA is the act that sort of governs this rulemaking.
Okay. Can you sort of summarize how UTD responded? Did they do anything in response? Did they have enough time to do anything in response?
So the day after this came out, I'm sure everyone saw the email, but if they didn't, President Benson sent out an email statement talking about, the university was going to fight this, and if you were an international student, they would find some way to, work things out. And this was just one day after it came out. And then later, he joined in a letter, President Benson joined in a letter composed by the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities that called on Congress to pass legislation that allowed flexibility for international students, which, by the way, 655 universities or university systems signed that letter around the time this was rescinded. And he additionally also wrote that he had written to our 2 senators in Texas and 3 area members of the U.S. House of Representatives to basically request that the directive be set aside and the Department of Homeland Security continue the temporary waiver of credit hour limitations.
All right. Well, that's about our time for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to be talking to Anjali about in-person classes from the perspective of the professors. So stick around, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a quick promo break.
You're listening to the Mercury Morning News on Radio UTD. You can find Radio UTD at radioutd.com and follow them at Radio UTD across the social media board. And you can find us at the Mercury at utdmercury.com and at UTD Mercury on all social media platforms. Don't forget that the Multicultural Center's Welcome Back Party will be held digitally online on August 16th. And if you like writing like we do and you want to also write for us or Radio UTD, you can check out utdmercury.com or email blog@radioutd.com to write for Radio UTD's blog. And for our final Mercury story today, we'll be talking to Anjali to find out some more about the professor's point of view while transitioning to teaching class in different modalities. Anjali, could you tell us a little bit about what your story is about? Could you summarize it for us, please?
Sure. So my story was basically a follow-up to a different article I wrote last cycle, which talked about why professors were choosing to teach online instead of choosing one of the in-person modalities. And so for this cycle's article, I wanted to focus on why professors were choosing to teach in person, because there was a survey conducted by the Academic Senate about a month ago that found that about 50% of faculty preferred online instruction. So I wanted to know why of the remaining amount wanted to teach in person.
So where'd you find the sources for this specific story? Knew a person, or just sending out emails?
I went to Coursebook and just searched up classes in various subjects. So like I typed in LIT for literature or like BIOL for biology. And then I contacted the professors of courses that were listed as hybrid or had in-person class times and locations to see if they were willing to speak about the reasons for their chosen modality.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And, oh, go ahead, Ben.
All right, sorry. Can you tell us which professors you did end up interviewing as well?
So
who are your sources?
My first source was Dr. Pedro Gonzalez, who's a professor of history and is teaching a survey of Latin American history course and the history of human rights and human security. Sorry. And then my second source was Dr. Ashley Barnes, who is a literature professor. And my third choice was Dr. David Murkison, who is a biology professor and is teaching a histology class.
So what did your professors that you interviewed sort of cite as the pros and cons of choosing the different modalities that they chose to work with for this semester?
The most common benefit all my sources mentioned was student engagement and the ease of instruction. So Dr. Ashley Barnes said that class discussion was her default mode of instruction, and that while it could be replicated online, she didn't feel that it would be the same. And she describes these discussions as like improvisational conversations. And so both the classes she's teaching have less than 20 students. And so she felt that the high flex format provided the best of both worlds. And she also said that she's an instructor who relies heavily on the whiteboard, and she felt like she couldn't easily recreate that online. And similarly, Dr. Murkison, who's teaching the oral histology and embryology course, said that he relies on lecture slides with blown up images of tissues to point out the finer details. And so they felt that student engagement and like the ease of instruction would be better in person. But interestingly, Dr. Gonzalez mentioned that some students performed better online in the transition this past spring because they were engaging more. They would like class discussion posts and comments. But then some of the students who were actually very active in person kind of struggled a little bit more online. So he chose the hybrid format as a way to benefit his students so that they could get the benefit of both online and in person. But the main drawback of teaching in person that they all cited was, of course, the safety of students and instructors. But they felt that since their classes are generally pretty small, they felt comfortable that with mask requirements, social distancing, and sanitation, in-person classes would be a safe environment.
So you're talking about safety. Are there any other kinds of precautions or changes that are taking place for the in-person classes?
So of course, the smaller classes are being moved into bigger lecture halls to adhere to social distancing guidelines, and all students and faculty are required to wear masks while in class. But one change at the university is that the university has purchased cameras to be installed in classrooms with any face-to-face interactions so that the classes can be recorded or live streamed for remote students.
And what's the difference between hybrid and high flex? Because there's 5 modalities that the university put out. You have in-person, hybrid, high flex, online remote. And online remote, it's online, whatever. But why is there a difference between hybrid and high flex?
So hybrid is basically just they'll meet maybe like once or twice a week every week, and then a lot of the course is also conducted online. And then high flex is basically it's like you'll meet the normal amount of times each week, but the group of students who are in each class will be different. So like half of the students may come on like week 1, and then that'll rotate out like the next week.
I see.
Okay. So are there any other obstacles that professors have cited in terms of their transition to various modalities?
Since you need to have like asynchronous the option for asynchronous learning as well for students who may not be able to come to campus, Dr. Murkison talks about how he had to rework his exams because it's difficult to control the testing environments for students who are not like in class, and his exams feature a lot of images that take more time to load up for students. He also mentioned that his office hours had to shift online, which provided like a different challenge in how he interacted with his students. And Dr. Barnes said that she didn't teach last spring, so she actually didn't have experience with the transition to online. So she used a course created by the Center for Teaching and Learning to learn how to like conduct meetings and record lectures on Microsoft Teams.
So, what are like, so you said there's a course being taught, so are all the online or remote classes kind of being centralized to one platform like Teams, or are they still kind of just all over the place? Do you know?
I think most of them are being centralized to Teams. I know like this past spring it was kind of all over the place. Some were on Teams, some were on like Blackboard Collaborate, some were on Zoom, but I think for this coming semester, most of it will be like localized to just Microsoft Teams or Blackboard Collaborate.
Okay. And is there anything else like interesting that any of the professors were talking about in terms of just transitioning or how they felt about trying to have hybrid high flex classes?
I was talking to Dr. Murkison about my experience in the transition to online, and he was asking me about like any challenges that I faced, and I talked about how I was getting distracted. It was easier to get distracted with online classes, and he said that that was also one of his reasons for choosing in-person classes because he felt that it's easier for students to stay focused, and it's a little bit more structured with, I guess, an in-person class, and so that was also part of his reasoning. And he said he's curious to see how many students will actually attend his in-person class.
Do you know how many actual in-person classes are there right now? As a kind of percent, if you could like ballpark a rough estimation percentage of all of the classes being offered at UTD this upcoming semester, how much of it is at least like hybrid or high flex?
So I don't have access to that information. I tried to contact the provost's office and the university registrar, but they told me that that information is still being gathered up until the the start of school year. So I don't have access to that information yet. I was curious about it too, and I wanted to include that information in the article, but I couldn't.
So are there, in terms of professors that are teaching various courses, like not necessarily the same one course with different sections, but just different courses in general, are they going through like different modalities for different courses? Like, are they having to juggle two different kinds of teaching methods?
Of the professors that I spoke to, I think they stuck with one modality for all the courses that they're teaching. So Dr. Gonzalez stuck with the hybrid mode, Dr. Barnes stuck with just the high flex option, and Dr. Murkison chose in person. Dr. Barnes did mention that she felt that it would be the best, like high flex would be the best of both worlds, but she's not like super attached to that one modality, and so if she mentioned that if that option isn't like good for all of her students, the ones who are online and are attending in person, then she might like figure out a different way to instruct her students.
All right. Well, thanks for sitting with us, Anjali, and talking to us about the different modalities of in-person varieties that various professors have been kind of going through. Hey, don't forget you're listening to Radio UTD and you're listening to the Mercury Morning News. It's a collab between the Mercury and Radio UTD to talk to various writers and talk about the latest news from the latest news cycles. And hey, don't forget the Multicultural Center has got a welcome back party digitally. It's online, August 16th. And if you want to come to something a little bit closer to today, Radio UTD is going to have a Retro Rhythm Games Night on Twitch this Thursday, July 30th at 7 p.m. Unless it's already past July 30th, in which case you missed out. It was an amazing event. All right? So don't forget you can follow us at Radio UTD or at UTD Mercury, depending on who you want to follow. And our websites are just utdmercury.com and radioutd.com. Coming up next, you're going to be listening to Daniel Valdez, Programming Director at Radio UTD, talk to Savannah Scher, who is going to talk about the Save Our Stages campaign so that we can have concert venues to come back to after this is all over.
I'm talking to Savannah Scher, the former station manager for Radio UTD and a current booking assistant for Margin Walker, which is a great show promoter in Texas. Savannah, talk to me about what Margin Walker does when there isn't a global pandemic ravaging the world.
We are one of the bigger independent promoters in Texas. We have an Austin office and a Dallas office, but we also book in San Antonio and Houston. Lots of shows, primarily in like indie, punk, a little bit of hip hop, that we route throughout the state. Lots of good stuff. Definitely things have changed with the pandemic, but normally we're working with agents to bring your favorite indie bands to Dallas and Austin.
How have local venues and promoters like yours been affected? And I know that your company has been doing things to adapt to the times, like your show bond program. Talk about some of that.
We have had to furlough a majority of the staff during this time because there's simply nothing to be doing right now. I myself have been furloughed, just chilling and trying to stay up to date with the news as far as this industry goes. But yeah, we're trying out a program where you can pay. It's basically like a fancy gift card where you would buy right now a certain amount of money that you could apply to tickets in the future. That gives us some money to, spend on overhead. And we're also dabbling in the live stream world. Lots of agents have been expressing interest in that, where we would record in a safe, or we typically aren't the ones doing the recording at all, but artists would record themselves doing a performance that we would then stream for some amount of money, like you're going to a concert, but you're paying for access to the video. We're also doing some free events too, just to keep people from going absolutely crazy at home. Something to do.
Yeah, I could definitely use that. Tell me about the National Independent Venue Association and the Save Our Stages campaign.
Mm-hmm. So NIVA, the National Independent Venue Association, is a group of independent promoters and venue owners and other affiliated workers from every single state. There's like 2,000 groups involved that realize that since we were the first industry to kind of be impacted by this, as soon as South by Southwest was canceled in like early March, everything kind of became real. We realized that we are going to need more assistance than the existing government funding programs can offer. So a bunch of different promoters and venues got together to start working with lobbyists to try to get some legislation moving to secure funding that can be better used to help venues, because the current Paycheck Protection Program has very specific rules about how you can spend the money. Like most of it needs to go towards paychecks, obviously. But then you still have to pay bills and pay rent in order to physically have a space. And there's a bunch of overhead costs that can't be addressed with the current loans. So NIVA has been pushing for a separate funding package that would let venues spend the money in more flexible ways and also let the loans be paid back in a much more forgiving window. So luckily, they've been able to propose a bill called the SaveOurStages Act. It started off just as a hashtag to get fans as well as artists to spread the word and help the community understand why this is so important. And it has been proposed as a bill recently. So hopefully they will be able to get that passed and secure some long-term funding.
That's really what I'm hoping for. I mean, local venues, promoters play such a huge role in sustaining a local arts community. I mean, you've worked not just with radio, but with Margin Walker now, so you have a really expansive view of the role that independent venues, the promoters play in keeping the community going.
Right. DFW has a very rich DIY music scene, but, you know, artists, it's very rare for an artist to jump from like playing house shows to playing really big venues. And so all of our smaller venues like Three Links and Club Dada are crucial for not only our local music scene, but for smaller artists that do tour nationally. Like all of your favorite bands started playing in small, intimate places like this. And NIVA has estimated that for every $1 spent at a venue on ticket sales, it generates $12 of economic activity in that city. So there's like a very tangible benefit to having these venues around for the community at large economically, as well as for the just like cultural benefit of having a space where local artists as well as national artists can come and make art.
Venues and promoters are fighting the good fight with NIVA, but how can fans and listeners advocate for the livelihoods of the creators whose work we love?
NIVA has some really easy, like already generated forms that you can just pop your name in and send off to your legislators to push for support for the venues. But additionally, paying for live streams and buying merch, particularly from Bandcamp, is going to be one of the best ways that you can, as a consumer, help artists that you love. Bandcamp has been doing, on the first Friday of every month, they waive their cut of sales. So you can buy 100% of the money that you spend on Bandcamp on those days will go directly to the artist. And Bandcamp is already the best platform for artists anyway. They take a small cut as it is. So yeah, buying merch and buying music from the most direct source that you can and supporting whatever interesting and innovative ways that artists are coming up with is the best way right now.
We're going to wrap up here, and thank you so much for talking with me.
No problem.
I'll ask you one more question so we don't end on a bummer note about, oh my God, what's going to happen to live music? Oh my God, which is what I think about every day anyway. But what music has been keeping you going the past few months?
I must say I've been listening to less music than I normally would in this crazy time, but I'm really into the new album by Oh Brother. I've liked that band for a really long time. Didn't relate so much to a few of their most recent albums, but this one, it was like, I'm into it again. It really hit the spot. If you like Radiohead and like Sigur Rós and stuff like that, they do a good mix of like sludgy bass tone, but really pretty ambient stuff sometimes, and feels good.
That's the radio DJ coming out in you, because all those phrases used are so like press release, like that's how I would hear about those records. You sold it. I'm gonna have to check it out after this.
Cool.
All right, well, thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Mercury Morning News. We're about to be on our way out, but before we are, what did you think about today, Nanika? Obviously, we can't comment on the radio story. We haven't heard it ourselves. We're stuck in the past. But you guys listening, you're in the future. So Nanika, what did you think about the stories we covered today?
I think that a lot of the stories that we covered today were a lot more weighty topics than we're used to, especially because we talked about the compromises in students' learning experiences and whether they can stay on campus or not. and whether they have to go back to their hometowns or not. And so a lot of these things had to do directly with just students' livelihoods. So I think it was definitely a lot more serious this time. So yeah.
Hey, that's how it is, you know. We're in a new world now. We've got new things going on. And that's going to be all for today on the Mercury Morning News. Next time, it's going to be hosted by Ellis Blake Hidalgo and Aleena Hassan. They were both on the show today. You'll see them again next time. So until then, mask up, stay safe, and have a good Mercury morning.